The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, the Labor opposition will be opposing that motion. David Farrer, who is the National Party's pollster, on his blog this afternoon, gave the speech that John Key just read out a B grade. And he was being generous, Mr Speaker. He was being generous. We heard a lot of rhetoric. We heard very little substance, Mr Speaker. I would say that Alan Bollard, who rained on the Prime Minister's parade on Sunday, would classify that speech as Alan Bollard 1, John Key 0. John Key 0. Because that speech proves Alan Bollard right. There is no plan. There is the talk of step change, but there is no plan at all that any government member could look at and say that will close the gap with Australia. It's not step change, Mr Speaker. That's a step back, that speech. No bold plan, no plan at all. And the Prime Minister's spin doctors hyped this speech to be the most important speech that the Prime Minister would read this year. It was Big Tuesday, they said. More like Tiptoe Tuesday. Because let's look at the one thing where there was a sense of where the government wants to go, GST. Let me read out what the Prime Minister said. He signals a rise in GST, and I oppose GST because there is no way that they will implement that to be fair to all New Zealanders. No way that they will make that fair to all New Zealanders. Forget about the rhetoric of fairness. This is about mates' rates. This tax change...
I apologise to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Some interjection is reasonable when a point may be raised that is perhaps controversial, but to go on and on is unacceptable. I said the Leader of the Opposition would be heard, with courtesy would be extended to him, and I apologise for interrupting the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I oppose the increase in GST because there is no way that this government will ensure that the tax changes that they're bringing in will be fair to all New Zealanders. But even when he talks about GST, he does it with a trembling voice. Let's listen to what he says in the speech. We're only considering it. We're only considering it. No decisions have been made. No decisions have been made. We've asked for more work to be done on it. They know that New Zealanders don't believe that a national government will produce a tax package that will be fair across the board to all New Zealanders. Forget the rhetoric, look at the record. Look at the record of the Prime Minister's last tax changes in December 2008. 30% of the tax benefits to go to the top 3% of New Zealand income earners. Oh, Nick Smith says that's okay. 30% to the top 3%. Mr Smith, I wonder if he says it was okay that no New Zealand family with dependent children earning less than 40,000 got any tax cut at all. No New Zealand family under 40,000 got any tax cut at all, but it was okay to give 30% of the benefits to 3% of the top income earners. Shame, absolutely shame. What was interesting in the Prime Minister's comments was what he didn't say. He didn't say what he was going to do with the top tax rates. Well, he didn't say in this package, but we know, because he's been promising it to those mates that funded the National Party at the last election, that it would happen. Now let's have a look. Let's have a look at what happens when you cut the top tax rates. Well, Prime Minister will do pretty well out of it. On his Prime Ministerial salary, that'll be worth $509 a week to the Prime Minister. Take Paul Reynolds. Now, Paul Reynolds heads up Telecom, and I'm not going to include his bonuses. They run into millions. I'm just going to look at his base salary. On his base salary, he would get $2,600 a week. $2,600 a week. What about the person on the minimum wage? The person on the minimum wage, of course, got 25 cents an hour from the Prime Minister. Very generous Prime Minister. 25 cents an hour. You know, over a week, that almost enables that low-income but hard-working family to buy one packet of Weet-Bix. But out of the tax cuts at the top, the person on the minimum wage will get nothing. Nothing. Well, they probably didn't expect anything out of a national government. But take the person on the average wage. The average wage, Mr. Speaker, $48,600. What do they get from a tax cut that would take the maximum rate from 38 cents down to 30 cents in the dollar? Well, they'd get 35 cents. 35 cents. Not an hour, 35 cents a week, Prime Minister. 35 cents a week. If that's what you're going to do, and your silence, the Prime Minister's silence in this speech indicates that that is on the National Party's plans. The person on 70,000, you know, middle-income earner, doing reasonably well, but still finding things a bit tough, they'd get $12.69. Compare that to the Prime Minister's $509. And don't, therefore, have any member of the National Party come into this House saying that they're planning for a fair tax package. They've floated the idea that they'll put GST up. We know why GST is regressive, because the people that earn the lowest amount, have to spend all of their income and disproportionately end up paying more tax. I asked the Prime Minister what New Zealander that he's met out in the street has told him that they want the price of their bread to go up, the price of their milk, the price of their power, the price of their kids' shoes and their back-to-school needs. Who asks for an increase in GST? The truth is no one, except those people on the top incomes in New Zealand who expect GST to pay for cuts in the very high incomes that they are earning. And we have no confidence that this government will look after the needs of the people who will be affected by that. If anything, there will be a token measure to partially compensate them for GST, but the winners, I ask who the winners out of the national government's tax package will be. That's a fair question. Who are the winners and who are the losers? The winners will be the Prime Minister's best mates on their high incomes, and the losers will be average New Zealanders. Mark my words, that's what the figures show. But Mr. Speaker, this speech wasn't just about taxation. It was about how we were going to move New Zealand forward. And that I regret, because we needed a speech and we needed a plan that would show that the government had some idea of how to move New Zealand forward, but it lacked substance, it lacked conviction, it lacked anything new. You know, it was a little bit like watching those late-night TV programs where you see the repeats. Everything that has already been said was repeated in this speech. Take the Kopu Bridge. Remember the Kopu Bridge? It has been announced for the 11th time that the Kopu Bridge will be built. But I ask you, Mr. Speaker, where did the funding for the Kopu Bridge come into the budget, and who initiated it? It was under Labor. This policy, announced 11 times by National, brings the program forward by 6 months. 6 months only. And then I heard the Prime Minister talking about research and development. You know, the government has just discovered that science, research and development are important things. A pity, Mr. Prime Minister, that the Prime Minister didn't discover that when he and his government cut $2 billion out of the Fast Forward Fund. $2 billion. And then he cut research and development tax credits. And that was going to deliver in about 5 years' time, I think about $300 million a year to innovative companies that could take New Zealand forward. They cut that, and now he has the temerity to come into this House and say he wants to do something about science, research and development. I tell the Prime Minister that while he was cutting hundreds of millions out of research and development when he became government in this country, a smart government across the Tasman was increasing their expenditure on research and development by 25%. 25%. And the Prime Minister says he wants to close the gap. Wants to close the gap. That gap, Prime Minister, has got not narrower, but wider. Wider on research and development because of the steps that the government in power has taken. Wider on employment. The Prime Minister wants to close the gap, but what's happened in employment since the election? Our unemployment rates have risen 30% higher than those of Australia. Australia is getting its unemployment down because they've got a government that believes in bringing unemployment down, a government that's active, a government that doesn't simply sit on the sidelines and do nothing, and we have a government that does nothing. Oh, no, that's not right. We held a job summit last year. Remember, Prime Minister? The Prime Minister told us that the job summit would not be a talk fest. Not a talk fest. But that's all we got out of it. That's all we got out of that job summit. A handful of jobs. Well, 168,000 New Zealanders today have no livelihood. The Prime Minister told us in December last year that he was pretty happy about unemployment and that it was peaking at 7%. As he was telling us that, unemployment in New Zealand rose by 18,000. 18,000, and of those people that are now unemployed, more than a quarter of them have been out of work for 6 months or longer. These are people who are losing hope, who have lost their livelihood, and for whom this government is doing nothing. And then I hear in the Prime Minister's speech about the job guarantee. Remember the job guarantee that was to give young New Zealanders a guarantee that they'd be in work, education and employment. Prime Minister, the highest level of unemployment in this country is amongst our young people. 1 in 5 of our young people not in work, not in training and not in education. And for the Maori Party, shame, 1 in 4, more than 1 in 4 of young Maori out of work. And raising a flag over the harbour bridge is not going to deal with the fundamentals of people who want jobs, who want decent incomes. This government has failed on unemployment, and there is nothing in this Prime Minister's statement that gives us any hope that there is a plan. In fact, the Prime Minister has told the country this government is doing everything possible for those who are out of work. That simply, Prime Minister, is not true. It is not true. This government has sat on the sidelines. The government across the Tasman has got onto the field, has been active, has brought in skills and training, has brought in research and development, had a properly targeted stimulus package. Their unemployment is going down, ours is going up, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what in this statement gives any hope to hard-working New Zealand families who are trying to get ahead? And you know, if the government would listen, they might learn something, and it's a real problem that this government isn't listening. John Key wasn't listening to the Governor of the Reserve Bank. He's not listening to John Hattie. John Hattie was the man on whose the National Party's program of educational standards was supposedly based. What is John Hattie telling the country? And everybody respects John Hattie. He's a renowned expert in standards. John Hattie has said the government's program is fundamentally flawed, and will achieve the opposite of what the government is claiming. Time to listen to John Hattie, Prime Minister. Time too to listen to Peter Sharples, who told the Prime Minister that he hadn't been consulted and that he didn't agree. And what did he get? He got told off, he got told to shut up, and then he got bought off because national standards apply in the general schools, but they will not now apply in the Kura Kaupapa schools. That's double standards. That's double standards. If it's good for our mainstream schools, why isn't it good for our Maori schools? The Prime Minister never answered that. Mr. Speaker, families are struggling to make ends meet. Not just those at the bottom of the heap, they're finding it harder, but people right up to the middle income level. The Labour Cost Index that was released a week ago said that 56% of New Zealanders got no wage or salary increase last year. 56% of New Zealanders. Yet they have faced rising costs, and now the Prime Minister is promising them, with lifting GST, that he'll push those costs still higher. But where is there anything in this document, the Prime Minister's statement, that says that those families will get a lift? I want to finish, Mr. Speaker, on the question of the vulnerable, because the Prime Minister has told us time and again that he was going to look after the disadvantaged. You know, he came into my electorate to a street called McGeehan Close. He insulted them by saying it was a dead-end street. He said that these were people for whom the rungs of opportunity had been stripped out under them and that he would make things better. And he talked persuasively to a lady called Joan Nathan, and he took her young daughter Arawa and he led her hand in hand across the bridge. What did Joan Nathan say? What does she say about John Key today? She said that she's been let down by the Prime Minister and her daughter, used as a photo opportunity, exploited as a photo opportunity, wants nothing to do with the Prime Minister. She said she was employed by Jackie Blue. Before the election it looked really good, and the day after the election she was sacked. And Jackie Blue said that's because I merged my office with Sam Lotuainga. Well, I happen to know that Jackie Blue's office is in Dominion Road and Sam Lotuainga's office is in Onehunga Mall. So that can't possibly be true. That can't possibly be true. But Joan Nathan said this, and I want the National Party for a moment to listen to what this woman, lauded by the Prime Minister, now says. She said she had been impressed by John Key, but, quote, he's just made everything worse for us. He's just made everything worse for us and made it easier for ones that are higher up. I'm struggling every week. That's what Joan Nathan says. And, you know, not only was she sacked by the National Party when she was no longer politically useful to her, she had a training allowance, she says, to do a course. But that has been stripped away from us. That's been stripped away from her. And then I wonder what the Prime Minister really meant when he said he was there to make sure the rungs of opportunity were available for those people. Mr. Speaker, that is double standards. Mr. Speaker, nothing that we have heard from the government today gives us any indication of how it intends to take this country forward, let alone catch up with Australia, as was promised with all the political hyperbole that he could manage at the time of the election campaign. There is nothing in this package, Prime Minister, that indicates that the benefits of economic recovery happening internationally, 4% growth internationally this year, will be shared amongst all New Zealanders. There is nothing in this package that says that the government has any idea at all about how it can promote growth, how it can support innovation, or how it will go about helping build skills. We had a New Zealand skills strategy in New Zealand, Mr. Speaker. It was endorsed on a tripartite basis by the government, the then Labour government, the trade union movement, and by the employers. And I listened to Phil O'Reilly this week, who is normally a strong supporter of the government, but maybe the Prime Minister should listen to Phil O'Reilly on this, because he said one thing that he was really disappointed about was that there was no skills strategy for New Zealanders. 72,000 young New Zealanders out of work, without hope and without the chance to make the most of their lives. And the Prime Minister and the National Party can talk till the cows come home about guaranteed jobs or skill guarantees or youth guarantees. The truth is they talk about it and that's all they do. They do not do anything to help people on the ground who genuinely want to help themselves, who want to get ahead, who want to make their families get ahead. This government has nothing to help them. Mr. Speaker, this statement by the Prime Minister fails on every count.